Hello, everyone. I hope you all had a nice weekend. Welcome to week 5. I have a couple announcements to start us off today. First of all, I just wanted to let folks know that Chloe and I occasionally comment on your discussion board posts, and that may happen a couple days after you post it, kind of depending on the where your timing falls within the week. So I wanted to just give you a heads up because I don't think you receive notifications when people add a comment or a reply to your post. So it's a good idea to just go back after the week is over and take a look at your post and just see if there are any new replies. You may already be doing that to kind of see other students' replies, but again, that way you can see if Chloe or I is posting something, you'll be sure to see our feedback on your post as well. So it's a good way to kind of check in and see if there are ways that we're answering questions or kind of posing questions to you, perhaps making corrections to some misconceptions in your posting. So again, just a note to kind of guide you to take a look back through those, at some point as you're kind of reviewing previous discussions. Another announcement, I've gotten a couple questions as folks are starting to get into the writing stage, or at least kind of planning how they're going to write their research paper. And so I wanted to explain one thing in particular that people have asked about, which is the kind of relationship between your transcript and your actual paper. So remember, when you're conducting your interview, which should be a relatively lengthy interview, kind of as long as you can get someone to talk to you. Typically somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour is a good chunk of time to get enough information to write about. And remember, you are then transcribing 5 minutes of that interview. So transcribing just means writing down word for word what's happening in that recording. What are you saying? What are they saying? You don't need to correct, speech or anything like that, clean it up or anything. Just write down exactly what they say. There's a guide, remember, a sample transcript in that research project folder on Blackboard for you to look at to see kind of what a transcript looks like. But in any case, once you've completed that transcript of just 5 minutes of the interview, you're not transcribing the entire interview because transcribing, as you will find out, is very time consuming. It takes about an hour to transcribe about 10 minutes of talk. So this is I'm not asking you to do the whole thing because it would take you forever, but just to get some practice with this and to make sure that you have at least one section of the interview that you've really listened to very thoroughly as you're transcribing. It will kind of help you sort through ideas, get ideas to write about. And again, it's a good practice in ethnographic fieldwork. So once you've created that transcription, that's a separate document. You are turning that in, that transcript, but it's not part of your research paper. Okay, so those, the pages that you're writing, your description of your research, your analysis, your connections to the course concept, that's a separate document that you're turning in along with the transcript. So the transcript doesn't kind of go in the paper itself, okay? That being said, you can quote from the transcript. You can actually quote from any part of the interview, whether or not it's in the transcript, in your paper. So you should kind of be referring to the interview just like you would any other text, right? So if you're writing a paper for an English class about a poem or novel, right, you might summarize it, you might pull in specific quotes from it, and that's how you should be treating your interview in your paper. So you can use particular specific quotes, and you should use specific quotes from your interviewee to kind of support your interpretations of what you observed about the group. Okay, so hopefully that clears up questions that people may have. And again, remember, you should also be citing that interview just like you would any other source. And there's a link in the research project folder to the MLA citations page, so you can go there and see how you're supposed to include citations in a research paper when you're citing a personal interview. Okay, so if you have questions, other questions as you start writing, please do let me know or let Chloe know, and we will try to address those questions individually or as they come up with the whole group. Okay. As far as your discussion posts from last week, you guys did a great job engaging with the readings for the week, especially with applying some food waste concepts and terms to the article about Maine lobster, talking about the different contexts of food waste, for example, and a really nice job talking about commodification and definitions of folk art as they related to the article about the Angola prison rodeo. So nice work there. I did want to address a couple questions that were raised in those posts. One was about the idea that traditions can sort of disappear. So this, I think, was specifically in reference to the Baltimore screen painting article, or that video clip that you watched as part of one of your lectures about screen painting in Baltimore, which, as they describe in the video, has become less common with changes in technology. So I just wanted to emphasize that, remember, there's a kind of common misconception about folklore that it's something that's disappearing, that's from the past, right, that needs to be saved or quickly documented before it goes away, right? And that's something that, again, is a misconception. It's not that particular traditions don't change or sometimes disappear, but what happens is new traditions or variations or different kind of versions of that emerge in their place. Okay, so Chloe gave a nice example of this as a reply to someone on the discussion board about the idea of jokes and kind of oral performances of jokes being replaced by online memes in some ways. So technology doesn't make folklore or folk forms kind of disappear. It can allow new related forms to emerge, right? So communities do change over time, that's true. That can disrupt traditions. But folklore itself does not go away entirely. It just takes new shapes. So that's something to kind of think about as a common theme and thread throughout all the different genres of lore that we're discussing. Another question was about some of the kind of unusual or maybe new to you kinds of folk art that were described in the Angola prison art article. In particular, people had kind of questions about what makes something folk art, even if it's not a traditional form that's been passed on from other inmates. For example, folks are describing the boot that one inmate turned into birdhouses, right? And so I just wanted to address that and say that if you go back and look at those definitions of folk art from the PowerPoints on material culture and folk art, you'll see that most of those definitions still apply, right? So even though this might not seem like what you're expecting, if we think about things like this is something that's informally learned, right? The inmate who made those did not go to art school to learn how to make birdhouses, right? He remembered seeing them somewhere and recreated them from memory. So that's one thing that kind of is consistent with that definition of folk art. It's also something that is formed within primarily the context of these firsthand interactions among prisoners, right? So, this is something that's expressive of prisoners as a folk group, even though it may not be the exact same thing that other people are making. It's still this idea that these are folk artists who are using kind of whatever materials are available, right? So this ability to kind of be creative with found objects or available resources is expressive of this particular group's traditions. And it also has that aspect of being both functional, right, as a birdhouse, and decorative as this kind of art object. So in many ways, it's even though these objects might not seem obviously like folk art, they are consistent with and kind of illustrative of those definitions. So anyways, I'm glad folks seem to kind of really get into those readings and enjoy learning about some of these things. I hope that you'll continue to think about how these kinds of traditions are evident and relevant to your own lives, right? Especially things like food traditions, objects that maybe people in your family or your friends make. You'll start to kind of see these patterns of material culture as part of your own lives. Next week, this week, you'll be learning more about body lore and performance. And this is sort of a almost transitional week in between material culture and customary culture, these two major genres. So body lore is a genre of folklore that relates to both material culture, particular objects, things that people make, and customary culture, things that people do. So we'll see examples of both kind of overlapping this week. Body lore is something we'll talk about, you'll learn about in the beginning of the week. It's a genre of folklore, sort of folklore related to the body, right? So things, for example, that people put on their bodies, like tattoos, clothing, things that people do with their bodies, like dances, kind of expressive forms, right? So you'll also learn about costumes, folk costume, and body decoration or adornment as particular examples of body lore. You'll learn about performance and gender as two important kind of concepts or approaches to studying folklore related to the body. And you'll have two examples of body lore in a reading called the Maintenance of Heritage on folk costumes. And then the second example is coming from a film this week called The Painted Bride. And that film, you will find a link to it in the same place that you always go for your readings. So you'll see a Painted Bride link in the readings folder, and that will just take you right to that film. And you can watch that as sort of a complement to your readings and lectures this week. Okay. As you're reading the chapter on performance in the textbook, I also just wanted to alert folks to thinking about this as it's an approach kind of more broadly used to study folklore. So we're talking about it in relationship to body lore, but this is really a theory, a way of understanding folklore that's relevant to any genre. So we can think about any aspect of folklore, whether it's a story, a joke, a recipe, right, a costume. Any of these things can be kind of looked at and studied and analyzed as a performance in some way. So this is something that you'll read about in this textbook chapter, but it's also something that you can think about how you might apply in your fieldwork projects. So for example, are there things that people are doing when you're observing your group, the group that you're observing, when they're interacting? Are there certain things that seem sort of staged in some way, right? Are they kind of being set off as important and something that people should be watching? Are there particular people in the group who kind of seem more like an audience than a performer, right? So you can kind of apply this metaphorical idea of a stage performance to just watching how people are interacting in their everyday lives. And that's really, this concept of folklore as performance. So some things to think about applying to your own research as well. Finally, just with the discussion board, the 5th discussion board this week, just encouragement to keep up the good engagement with the readings and with each other. And a note about your quiz 5 for this coming week. It's a little bit different format than the past couple weeks. It will be one short answer question instead of, I think the past 2 both have been 3 multiple choice. So I just wanted to alert you to that. Sometimes people get nervous when they only see one question. They feel like they missed something. So it is just one question this week. And because it's short answer, you won't see your responses won't be graded automatically. So you won't see that kind of correct response and score pop up as soon as you are done. Rather, you'll see it a couple days later once all the quizzes have been manually graded. Okay, so good luck this week with everything. Hope you enjoy learning about body lore and gender and performance and reading some and watching some fun stuff about costume and adornment. And keep in touch as you're getting into hopefully the kind of thick of things with your research project. Keep in touch about that as questions arise. Okay. Thanks all. Have a great week.